Hi guys, it's Rory here and welcome to the Football Heritage Podcast. Hope you're enjoying everything that our fantastic podcast has to offer so far this year. Firstly, I'm here to tell you that our brand new patron exclusive feed, the Football Heritage Extra, is now live. You can subscribe for £3 per month and that gives you access to an additional exclusive podcast every Thursday. We've designed our patron exclusive content to be a wee bit more casual, more niche and full of exclusive insights and interviews with our friends, contributors and other people working within football. Links to subscribe are in all of our episodes, show notes as always. Looking forward to seeing you over there. Secondly, if you enjoyed last week's show, it would mean the world to us if you could leave a review on Apple and Spotify, or if you're listening on YouTube, a comment and a like. It really helps the algorithm pick us up and does so much for pushing us in front of new listeners every week. Please remember as well to leave a comment on our episodes on whichever platform you're listening on. One of our favourite things is engaging with you guys and being able to speak with you about the conversations that we're having every week. Lastly, please remember to visit our website to read our articles and see what other projects we're working on at the moment. Or if you like, come and join us on our social media for daily posts and content related to the heritage of football across the world. We're always up for a chat, so if you have any questions, suggestions or feedback, feel free to DM us on any of our socials or email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. I think that's about everything that I need to plug at the moment. Thanks once again for listening. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and I'm delighted this evening to be joined first of all by Jordan Thomas.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks very much for coming on, Jordan. It's a pleasure having you on the show tonight. And we're also joined by Juanjo Lecumberri.
Hi, Rory. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No problem. Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate both of you coming on this evening to talk about the story of Lleida CF. Incredibly interesting story, one that Jordan and I have been trying to organise for a while now. And if anyone is familiar with Jordan's work on La Liga and Beyond, you'll know all about the story of Lleida, or if you follow Spanish football, it's something that you'll probably be familiar with. Lleida CF is the latest incarnation of a football club based in Lleida, which can trace its roots and origins back to the original UE Lleida, who fell out of existence in 2011. The Lleida CF we're talking about today were founded in 2011, but underwent a liquidation process in June earlier this year, after there was a number of incidents of non-payment and payments being defaulted, basically. That ended up resulting in an administrative relegation and a general feeling and malaise around the club that history was being repeated. And then last month, a club originally known as Lleida 1939 were formed. Interesting for a number of reasons, mainly because they were really staking their claim to the heritage of the original UE Lleida by using their original year of founding. And then they acquired Lleida CF's brand, social media, historic honours, and importantly, the supporters base as well. And in many ways, the story of Lleida CF is quite similar to that of Olimpia Ljubljana, who we spoke about a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, but I would argue that Lleida's story is probably a little bit more mixed up in the genre of fan power versus rogue owners, and there's a little bit more politics involved with that as well. But despite that, through numerous name changes, legal issues, liquidations, refoundings, and a million other false dawns, Lleida CF are still alive today and very much carrying the heritage and identity of UE Lleida forward into a new era where supporters hold the power in the football club and aren't at the mercy of ownership groups who want to see the club killed. And in that light, Lleida CF are one of the many incredible fan-owned Phoenix clubs to be found in Spain's lower divisions. We spoke about that last year as well. Just before we start things off properly, Jordan, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself first of all?
Yeah, so I'm Jordan Thomas. I've founded La Liga and Beyond, which I've been running now for just under 2 years. And it's basically just taking a wider look at Spanish football, looking through the tiers and sort of looking at the history and also like the culture of Spanish football. And I think one of the things that I found living in Spain, I'm sure Leku will corroborate with me on this, is like the big two take up so much of the breathing space and so many clubs just don't get that spotlight or any attention even locally. So for me, it was something that I found and it felt really, it was strange to me when I first came to Spain, and it's something that I'm really passionate about and something that I write about, and I was expecting it to be really niche, but it's surprised me how many people are interested both in Spain and internationally, really. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, I completely agree with you though, mate. I think that in many the same way as England, I think once you get underneath that top 5 league status that La Liga has, there's so much more to Spanish football than just Barcelona and Real Madrid and, you know, other clubs within La Liga as well. You know, all these different clubs, all these different regions that have their own really distinct and unique identities. It's really, really fascinating. It's one thing that I love speaking about on this podcast, as a lot of our listeners will know. That was one of my favourite parts of La Liga and Beyond, actually, was I think it was started last year, maybe the year before, and finished earlier this year, if memory serves, when you were speaking about all of these different regions and how their local identities are really kind of driven by their football clubs. It was a really fascinating series that you've done.
Thank you for that. But yeah, it's something that I really sort of understood going to Spain and sort of travelling across and going to different parts of Spain. It's just how unique and how different it is. It's I think Lecu, he's up in Catalonia, and it's very, very different from where I experienced it living in Andalusia. Even within the region, like I used to live in between Cadiz and Malaga. Cadiz and Malaga feel very different. You go up to Almeria, and that's different again. That feels very unique. They don't feel Andalusian themselves sometimes. Traveling all across Spain, identity is so strong. The identity in your pueblo, in your town, in your ciudad, your city, it's really strong, and it's something that really sort of stuck with me, and it's something that I'm sort of passionate about telling that story. And I think that's why I sort of felt so much with Lleida and the fans there, because when I first saw that they were in trouble, it was the fans were so passionate. They were talking to me, they were updating me, and it really sort of, I could see how much it meant to them and how much the club meant to them, whether it was Lleida or Lleida CF. So yeah, it's just something that I'm really passionate about, and really try to get these stories out there and get them to a wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely, mate, and good on you for doing so. And speaking of fans, Juanjo Lecumberri is not just a supporter of the club, he's a journalist, but first and foremost, he's also the vice president of Lleida CF in their most latest incarnation. But his connection with the club actually runs a lot deeper than that. His father is the third most capped player in Lleida's history and played for them between 1982 and 1992, which was one of the club's most successful eras. He's also written a book on top of that, which we're going to be discussing later on in this show. Leku, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
First of all, and again, thank you very much for inviting me, Rory, Jordan. Pleasure to be here. Also, because I want to thank you for taking the time, as Jordan was saying, to tell the story of a club like Lleida to an international audience. Clubs like ours, I think, don't usually receive much attention outside Spain, not even outside Catalonia, I will say. So I really appreciate what you are doing, how you were saying, guys, football is not only about famous clubs, right? So some of the most meaningful stories maybe sometimes come from places that most people have never heard of. And I think that's exactly what your podcast does. Regarding my introduction, I think not a lot to say apart from what you were saying, Rory. Yeah, as you say, a few months ago, I published my first book, Banderas Blaves, which actually was launched at the Camp de Sports, which is the Lleida Stadium. And yeah, I'm a journalist right now. I'm also serving as a vice president, which is a bit weird for me because I'm a guy who comes from the stand, from the crowd, and like the rest of the board, we are 9 people right now in the board. But again, we are supporters of Lleida, not people who has companies or people who want to make money with the club. It's exactly the opposite. We are doing this for free just to help the club. And actually, legally, we can be in the board for 4 years before we call elections, right? But
Yep.
we're going to do this at the end of this season because very important that the supporters, the memberships, they can vote in the very, very early first steps of this path, right? In the first season, not waiting 4 years to select the people that are going to be in the board. So yeah, myself and the rest of the board, we are just creating the very, very first steps of the club.
Yes. And I read something quite recently, just coming back to what you said about, football being so much more than just the big clubs in any nation. I read something recently that said that sometimes the worst thing about football is the 90 minutes on the pitch. Do you know what I mean? And I think with the types of things that we speak about on this podcast, it's often quite true because we like speaking about stories. And obviously, every club has its great matches. The reason that we go to football games is ultimately to watch a game of football. But for me, the interesting thing lies in the stories surrounding football clubs, their different identities, the different heritages, the different reasons that football clubs exist and why supporters support them. And in the case of Lleida, especially in your new incarnation, The story of Lleida is one of the most interesting that's come out of Spain in the last few years. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, we'd actually done an episode with Miguel Pereira last year on the fan-owned Phoenix clubs of Spain, and Lleida has joined that small grouping of football clubs within Spain who have actually founded either as football clubs or as football clubs who have split from a larger club to become fan-owned, so that the power is in the hands of supporters and the decision-making process lies with fan groups and different forms of fan ownership. Two that come to mind primarily are CF Reus, quite an older one, and there's also Unionistas Salamanca. The story of Lleida is very similar, and the reason that the club have formed in this new incarnation is primarily been for the same reasons. We'll start with the early history of football in Lleida. Football in Lleida can trace its roots back to roughly 1910, maybe a couple of years earlier. Different iterations of different clubs came and went as football within Spain and its wider communities tried to find its feet. And then eventually, within 1939, UE Lleida were founded, and that is where our story begins.
Yeah, with Lleida, as you were saying there, Rory, they made it into La Liga in 1950. They had a season there. And then they sort of spent the next 2 years in the next 24 years in the Segunda. So it was quite a rich time in their history. We saw them again in the 90s, where they then came under Mane, who was one of the most iconic coaches of the 90s in Spain. He took Alaves later, that many people remember, to the UEFA Cup final where they played Liverpool, and they played that famous game. They had a season in La Liga in the 90s, and I think, as Lecky will remember because his father was playing, they beat Barcelona in the Dream Team, they beat Real Madrid, and that sort of faded fast though. And 1993, they're sort of pivotal years, because that's when clubs went from being socios or soci, if you're Catalan, to privately owned clubs. And I know that Miguel talked about that when he came on the podcast. That's when we started to see a lot of trouble with clubs in Spain, and that was sort of the story with the Lleida as well. And it didn't take too long before there was a lot of debt to the tax authorities. And
yeah, I mean, I'm gonna try to add something about the thing that you were saying. Yeah, and I think it's important to say that the roots of today clubs go back to 1939. Football in the city was reorganized after the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War finished that year, 1939, right? So years later, the club officially became Unió Esportiva Lleida in Catalan, because early on was in Spanish. So I'm always trying to explain something about Lleida when someone from outside of the city asks me about the club. And I think that in Lleida, people have always supported an idea, which is the blue shirt, the Camp de Sports, the stadium, which is the oldest stadium in Catalonia, and the third in Spain. It has been built in 1919. So the blue shirt, Camp de Sports, the anthem, the badge. I think that all of this connected represents the identity you mentioned before, the identities of the clubs, right? So I think that all of these items are very important in the city, right? So through the years, the Unió Esportiva Lleida became one of the biggest football clubs in Catalonia, outside Barcelona and Espanyol, of course. It spent many years in second division, twice reached La Liga, one, as Jordan said, at the early 90s with Mane, and the other one at the early 50s, right? It's also important to understand that Lleida is a city itself with a population of around 150,000 people, but it's also the capital of a much larger territory, that is the province of Lleida. I'm mentioning this because in the good times, every Sunday or every other Sunday, hundreds of people of, let's say, the village all across the province traveled to Camp de Sports. And the stadium also became a meeting point for generations, not only for people of Lleida, but for the towns. That's why I often say that Lleida has represented an entire community. That's important, I think, to understand. I want to finish mentioning Jordi Gonzalvo, which is another important coach in the history of Lleida. He was before Mane, right? So Mane was the coach who led the club to La Liga in 1993, beating Barcelona at Camp Nou and Madrid at Camp de Sports. But I also think it's very important to talk about Jordi Gonzalvo because during the 80s, he played a fundamental role in the history of the club. He helped, I will say, establish Lleida as a strong second division team. and laid many of the foundations that later allowed Manes team to reach the first division. But what makes Jordi Gonzalvo unique, and I want to link this with the identity and history of the clubs, is his contributions went far beyond football, because he actually composed the current Lleida anthem, which is pretty nice, and every supporter knows it, every supporter sings it. And this year, let's say 3-4 weeks ago, he had this gesture that says a lot about the kind of person he is, or Jordi Gonzalvo. He's already 80 years old. So he decided to donate the exclusive rights of the anthem to the new Lleida Club de Football, to us.
Fantastic. I mean, I was actually going to say, when we speak about club identity, club heritage, and also lineage as well, it would probably be a bit remiss of us to not talk about that golden era under Mané, but also your personal ties to the club, Lecu. Your father is the third most capped player in Lleida's history, and that's not insignificant. The club really runs deep within your family history and lineage as well. This kind of ties it quite nicely together because he played for Mané in that golden era. I always hate saying that not very much happened for a football club outside of its golden era, but in really this period of Lleida's history, out with maybe the 40s and 50s, was really the peak of what the club achieved. And it must have been incredible playing under the club's most historic manager during that time.
I'm always speaking on my father because he played between 82 and 92, but he retired the season before. Not he retired, he moved to Second Division B the season before getting promoted to La Liga.
Oh, no.
So he spent 10 years in a row in the club being the captain, and he just moved out the year before.
That's so unlucky.
Which, yeah, I mean, I don't know if he pretends it's not important for him, but he never said that it was a big deal for him. I honestly believe it was a big deal.
Of course it was. It must have been.
So yeah, apart from this golden era that you guys are talking about, also in the late 19th and early 2000, it was a good period for Lleida because the club established itself as a strong second division team, which now I think with the perspective of the time, I can see that we didn't give value to that moment because we were used to be in second division, right? So the crowds weren't that big, the people wasn't that happy about having the club in second division. We were like feeling that we deserve more, or at least fighting for the promotions to La Liga every single year. And now it's like something that we only can dream of, being in second division, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. What was it like for you growing up knowing that your father was playing for this team? Because, when someone is so intrinsically entwined with a football club at that point, that really trickles down to the rest of the family. So, growing up with Lleida, it must have been one of the first things that you saw was a Lleida jersey, and It's amazing thinking that club has been your life since the moment you were born.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And look, the funny thing is, I was born in the 89, right? So I don't have like memories of watching my father playing in the stadium. I have heaps of photos. I have a lot of photos of myself with the team before the kickoff, or in the dressing rooms, or in the stands. But I don't really remember that moment, right? It's like I think that I remember them, but it's just because I see all of those photos a lot of times. And it's funny because the first memory, or my earliest memory related with Lleida, it's being at my grandparents' house playing the anthem of Jordi Gonzalvo. It was my favorite song when I was a kid. So I remember myself in the corridor of my grandparents' house playing that. And because my last name, Lecumberri, is Basque, in Lleida, there are not more Lecumberris, right? So it was pretty obvious in the school or everywhere I went that my dad was the player. So everyone was asking always about the Lleida and the football club. So even if I didn't want to talk about it, or I will say that I didn't pick Lleida as my club. It was just part of my family, of myself. And as you were saying, I like my parents' house is full of Lleida tracksuits or Lleida jerseys, or so it was something like in my daily life was always there. But my dad, he never talked a lot about it. He wasn't that kind of football player. He was more into educational stuff. So it was more outside in the street with my friends or playing football that Lleida towards me was like 90% of the time.
Sure. I mean, yeah, like you said there, you're either born into it or you choose your team. There's no really other way about it. So many other people can say that. I think it's great when you hear these stories about being born into it, though, like just the different, I guess, nuances of how that comes about and how it happens, because by virtue of being born into it, you are the next, I guess, person carrying that legacy of generational support into the next generation. Do you know what I mean? It's as much a part of the family as anything which football club it is you support. So I do find that all very fascinating. But fast forward to 2011, as you were saying, Jordan, a huge amount of problems really kind of came to a head when UE Lleida first liquidated. I think, if memory serves, the debt was somewhere in the region of 28 million euros, which in today's money doesn't seem like a lot, but even in 2011, certainly for a club that's not in La Liga, is a extortionate amount of money.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money. And around that time, there was a lot of clubs in a similar situation. And unfortunately, Lleida at the time went into administration and were eventually liquidated, which was obviously really tough for obviously Lecu and so many thousands of Lleida fans. And then we then had the start of Lleida CF then, and that they sort of made it towards the third and the fourth tier. But I think what a lot of people maybe don't sort of realise outside of Spain is how tough it is if you're not in those top two divisions. Financially, it's really, really tough. And back then, the third tier was regionalised, but it's looking at 80 to 100 clubs between that, and it's not easy whatsoever for clubs to survive. Even today, the third tier in Spain is, we've seen 3 clubs this season that have sort of hit financial problems, and 2 of them, Tarazona, have gone out of business, and Arentero, they've dropped to the 5th tier. That outside of those top 2 leagues, there just really is not the money, and it's so hard for clubs to survive, and we've sort of seen that time after time, unfortunately.
Yes, the number of football clubs, not just in Spain, but across Europe and across the world recently, that have went bust has been really concerning. There's another wave of it taking place, but certainly lower down the divisions. I mean, even in Scotland, we've had 3 or 4 pretty significant non-league clubs go into abeyance for the year, which means they basically take a year out of the league because they can't field a team. But at that level of the game, with the resources that they have and then won't be getting for an entire season, it can be a death sentence for some of them. And a lot of these clubs are hundreds of years old, so we just need to see how that continues developing. But the same issues keep coming up, where it seems to be, and I know Italy's a bit of a different case where clubs fold and then refound quite regularly, but there does seem to be a bit of a commonality at the moment where rogue owners have been really desecrating football clubs. Within Spain particularly, one of the great counters to that is that so many clubs end up refounding, and they're refounded by supporters. But, like you said earlier, Jordan, a lot of clubs are founded as private companies for reasons. Those fan groups then end up making way for someone who's going to bring investment, etc., and then the cycle repeats itself almost. And obviously in 2011, Lleida Esportiu then founded, and things for a while were great, but then all of a sudden it kind of started going in the same direction. But a lot of the ownership issues with Lleida Esportiu was so divisive with the supporters base. At the time, things got very toxic for a period.
So I wanted to add that for us, when Unió Esportiva Lleida was liquidated and Lleida Esportiu started, for the supporters, like for us, it was the same club, right? So we played in the same stadium, same division, it wore blue. The supporters continued following it. That for me, it doesn't make it the legal stuff or the, you know what I mean? The legal registration. It is, for me, the clubs are made by the supporters. So although legally it was a different club. Emotionally for the people, so it was the continuation of UE Lleida. It was sad because at the beginning of Lleida Esportiu, 2011, there was optimism. In terms of sport, what was going on the pitch, the first years were actually very positive. We fought for promotion to Segunda División, to the second division in 3-4 seasons. There were good crowds. There were exciting seasons, right? So it felt that the club could eventually return to professional football. But the thing is that behind the scenes, many of the structural problems never really disappeared, and they had constant financial difficulties, which is weird because they started the club from scratch in 2011. So they were in the same division, but without the debt. And it was also like regarding so if we need to compare with the current situation, so the football club in that moment belonged emotionally to the city, I will say, but institutionally the supporters had almost no influence.
Yep.
So looking back, I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we learned.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I've mentioned in this podcast before when we've spoken about similar football clubs, but there's a huge matrix of different issues related to heritage, identity, ownership, authenticity when we speak about football clubs folding in this way, because on one hand you've got a football club going to the wall and ceasing to exist because they've ran out of money and had to be liquidated, basically. And then a new club forms and the supporters are happy again. The supporters view it as the same football club because, like you said, like who rightfully so, emotionally and culturally, the football club is the continuation of the original club. So why wouldn't it be the same? But the decision-making isn't in the hands of the fans. But then when this club ends up folding, the fans, like you said, lessons were taken, and the fans then form their own new club, who then take on the reins of really kind of driving the heritage and identity of the club. So you have all these different things around ownership and who decides what, who owns who is the proper custodians of what is to do with the football club. There's such an interesting discussion in what this all means for football supporters, because at the end of the day, for every single football club, you've almost got two different camps. You've got the club in terms of who owns the club, how the club appears to different people, how it's marketed, and then you have the supporters, who are the people who ultimately represent the club and who the club represents. Do you know what I mean? So you have this massive, you're always going to have this huge divide, but ultimately I agree with you that some decision making does have to sit with the supporters for that heritage to be protected and that identity to be championed in a way that properly represents them. One thing I wanted to ask just before we move on, can you just explain how in this situation a football club was able to liquidate and fold, but the new football club were then able to play in the same division?
Yeah, because that was this law that you were able in Spain to, let's say, achieve the competitive rights of the team. So you got the competitive rights of the team, but not the depth.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And Cordoba did it also in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, and that was the last time the Spanish Football Federation allows that. Is it correct, Jordan?
It was Compostela that did that. So Compostela were able, and they were basically the last club to get through the loophole. So they were a glistening team, and quite similar to Lleida in the 90s. They made it to La Liga, but they were able to refound like without the debt and carry on where they were. And after that, it was then closed off as an option for clubs in Spain to be able to do that, because there was a lot of outcry from clubs lower down in the divisions that these clubs were essentially wiping out their debts but not paying any consequences.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about it, of course, it is not fair. But when you are a supporter of a team, don't know, man. You looking just for the history of the club, or you want this history keeping moving on? And if someone tells you, look, you're gonna keep the division, you're gonna be in the same place with the same jersey, with the same badge, with the same anthem, it's all right, go for it.
Yeah.
Don't know. But I think that we learned a lesson from there, as I said. So we didn't know at the moment, right? But looking at the past, right now that we had the opportunity to put the supporters in front of the club and have the people who really love the club taking the decisions. I mean, even starting from the last tier of, which in Catalonia is the 10th division. Yeah. It's the 10th division, which is even more difficult to the other regions of Spain because of the population, right? So even starting from there, from the very bottom, I think it's the best option by far.
I would say so. I think there's merit in starting from the bottom if it means that the supporters have that power within their hands. At the end of the day, as supporters, the things that we care about the most, obviously our club performing and playing well, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, are we really concerned with the finances behind the club as long as they're stable? Not really. The things that we care about are the club colours, the badge, the name, the crest, our identities and values, our chants and our songs, our match day rituals. Like, those are the types of things that give our club substance in life. And culture, obviously, that's kind of part of the reason, and it's all driven by us as supporters. So at the end of the day, those are the things that are important to us. And if it means that it says the club was founded a few years ago or 100 years ago, then as long as you're continuing that on, there's a debate around that as to whether it really matters or not. But, eventually after Lleida Sportiu had existed for a little while, there was then a few name changes. There was also some legal issues surrounding those name changes. And then the financial issues reared their head again, which led to the liquidation of the club earlier this year. Leku, how did you feel seeing your club go to the wall like this for a second time?
So, as you said, earlier this year, the history repeated itself. And it was sad because in the last game, so it was even more sad because in the last game of this season, we thought someone was about to buy the club, right? But the guy tried to scam the club. So it was a guy that apparently he was about to buy the club, French guy that was living in UK or something like that. But so even the club made the announce that this guy was about to buy it and we will save the division and everything. And at the end, it was a scam. So it's like a movie for us, a terror movie, what was going on with Lleida. So yeah, for many supporters, I mean, not for many, for all of us, it felt like, let's say, reliving the trauma of 2011. But as I said before, this time something was different, I think, because 14 years earlier, or even 4 years earlier, we were waiting somebody else to save the club, right? So right now, or this time, supporters organize themselves. I think that we understood that if we want to protect the identity, I'm not talking about divisions or scoring goals or achieving promotions, just the identity of Lleida, the history of Lleida, we had to take responsibility ourselves. I honestly believe that this is the biggest chance. And the mentality even changed. I guess we will talk about it later on, about the memberships that we have already. So the mentality in the city completely changed. It's like, look, we can do it ourselves. It's our time, the time of the people, the time of the community, to save what we really are, not just as a club, but also as a part, as I said, of a community, of a region. This football club represents much more than just football, represents the entire region, right? So it's okay, let's start, as I said, for the very bottom. But we have now the power of decisions of the future of the club. One membership, one vote. Everyone will decide the future of the club. And again, I'm really amazed of how the people react, because I was a bit afraid that the people was started to think about, oh wow, we're going to start from the 10th division, even grounds where there are not grass in the football pitch, you know what I mean? So that's for real. So again, the mentality changed. In the last 4 seasons, we never had this amount of memberships after 2 weeks.
Well, we can speak about that now. You mentioned the memberships, and Jordan, you were talking about signing up as a member just before we came on air. I mean, it sounds like, and again, we've said this we've had a number of podcasts on this show about different football clubs who have refounded after going bust. Bursaspor, we mentioned them in the Ljubljana episode, but that club as well in Slovenia, União de Bola and Madeira, who came out of the defunct CF União. So many football clubs go bust, and then the fans will reform. And of course, there is going to be that natural anxiety of, well, do they think the same thing is going to happen? Are they going to get behind us? Do they see us as their club anymore? You then see all these videos and photos of thousands of supporters turning out in like the 8th, 9th, 10th tier of different football pyramids because they want to see the club succeed. They want to back the club. Hereford in England, another great example, and another club that we've spoken about on here as well. So when supporters are faced with that challenge of having to climb back up the divisions, they really turn out for their clubs. And I think the fact that Lleida has always been a football club that has represented the region as opposed to just the city is a real testament to that. And like you said, the membership now reflects that.
Coming from it from outside, and I've seen, unfortunately, too many clubs sort of have to disappear and then start again in Spain over the recent years. I saw it a little bit in my home region of Andalusia with San Fernando. And while that was sort of Monchi who was leading that charge, and it was very much private ownership, like fans mobilised there. But I think what's been so impressive from Lleida and sort of Lecu and all the guys that are doing this right now is how organised it's been. So there was a clear plan from the newly found club straight away. They're really clear. The communication's been excellent with the fans throughout. I've been in touch with the club a couple of times and they've been superb to talk to. They really want to get the message out of the newly formed club and being a fan-run club, but also just seeing how much they're already engaging in the community. They've engaged the fan base. We saw it a little bit last year that the sort of fan base was doing everything it could to help the club, but the finances had hit such a tough point that they were working in almost impossible conditions, and it was sort of a miracle that they sort of saw the season out in the end, and that was really impressive. But I think, I've just been so impressed by the mobilisation and the support. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. I don't want to steal Lecu's thunder because it's hot off the press, but they've just hit 2,500 members, which
it's incredible.
You know, when we talk about the lower leagues in Spain, we talk about it as in the mud and you're playing in the mud. And there's going to be a lot of fans watching football in the mud in Lleida this season, which I think is it's amazing.
It's quite special to think about for you, Jordan, as well, being based in Spain, but obviously from the same, I guess, football and landscape that I'm from. How amazing is it to you? Because it's brilliant for me to think about for a number of reasons, but just for you, and as someone who obviously writes about this and voices your opinion on this quite regularly, can you give us some thoughts on the fact that there is now a really great cadre of these football clubs, these fan-owned Phoenix clubs in the lower echelons of Spain's football pyramid, who are showing people that it can be done? Because, you know, apart from a couple of notable examples, probably Clydebank and Wimbledon, this isn't something that really happens that much within the UK. And again, Clydebank have taken a long time to get back to where they historically probably should have been, Wimbledon as well. Whereas within Spain, it seems that now that someone has shown that there is another way to do this, a number of other fan groups are taking it upon themselves to make sure that this alternative football does happen.
Yeah, I think Unionistas, they were sort of the club that have really led the charge on this. They've sort of been a great example. They're really, really good at keeping in. They're the only club in the third tier that doesn't make a loss. But with having more and more clubs, so Orense, they're a fan-owned club. They've just made it to the third tier. I think they've had 6, maybe 7 promotions in the last decade, all just through the fans. We've had Royce, that we were talking about a little bit earlier. They're now in the 4th tier. So we really are getting these examples. And I think we've had so many liquidations in Spain and so many clubs that after the 90s, when they were privatised, that were run into the ground, that there's really a sort of pushback to go back to those days pre the 90s when these clubs really were owned by the members and the members had that say and they were sort of leading the charge with how the clubs were. And, you know, we've even got clubs like Logrones. There's so many clubs that are in between the 3rd and 5th tier that have really led a charge and have set the example for Lleida. And I know that I've seen a couple of videos and I know that you guys were in touch as far back as 2021 with some of these clubs to really see what you could learn from them and what could sort of be implemented in Lleida, because I think you guys could see what was sort of coming with Lleida CF, unfortunately.
Yeah, clubs like Unionistas that you already mentioned, also San Fernando that you already mentioned as well. Orense is another club that is doing the things really good. And also Europa is always supporting us, which is in the third tier and also owned by the memberships. San Andreu is not really owned by the memberships, but they are important for the club, right? And they always like supporting us as well. But yeah, as you said, so Jerez also, it was one of the clubs that we talked to.
Am I right in saying that there's also like an Independiente Rayo club now as well? I know that Rayo Vallecano are obviously not defunct, but a group of fans have founded a club further down the division because of the very obvious ownership issues around that.
Yeah. But look, it's really nice when you see like you are in this situation and all of these clubs that we are mentioning, they literally call us or text us like, guys, anything you need, honestly,
fantastic.
let us know. We can this network of clubs owned by the memberships, it's amazing, and it makes everything having sense, because I think that football, if we talk also about history or politics or society, I think that football has never existed in isolation, right? It always reflects the society around it. Economic crisis affects football, political changes affects football, cultural changes affects football. So I don't think football only reflects society, but also help us to understand society. So now in Spain or in the big cities like Barcelona, the rent is so expensive, or the people have to move out of their neighborhoods because they cannot pay it and they have to go outside. So all of these things, I think it has been reflected in the clubs as well. In Barcelona, people who cannot afford a ticket to watch Barcelona, they get closer to Europa or San Andreu, for example.
I was there in September in Europa, and everyone I spoke to said exactly the same, that they were Barcelona fans, but they just could not afford the tickets. They didn't like Montjuic. They felt like the club was so international now, and with the costs and everything around the world, like everything, your bills, your rent, they've all sort of moved to San Andreu or Europa or Jupiter.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think that if you want to understand a city or a country, one of the best places to start is a football club, right? So
I'm so happy you've said that, Leku, because I completely agree with you. I've said so many times, the best way for you to learn about the history of a country is to look at its football teams.
100%. So, and right now, I think that it's not a coincidence that there are all of these projects are being even stronger, like Unionistas or all of this. It's because of the situation of the country.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the one thing that has fascinated me and impressed me the most about all of these, this conglomeration of football clubs, though, is that all of them have set out to do this with three key objectives. One has to be put the power of decision making back in the hands of supporters and the people who love the club, first and foremost, in these new identities, but obviously, as we've mentioned, taking the former identities forward, but also maintaining their importance as a football club and a footballing identity for their communities. Like, I don't think we should overlook that these football clubs aren't by any means huge household names. They're not big international clubs. These are clubs that are entrenched in the localized communities and regions that they're from. And by maintaining their presence as such, they're reminding the community that they are there for them. And that goes a very long way. But number three, and again, I guess it should most be obvious, is that regaining their names and reclaiming the heritages of their football clubs and ultimately what they see as being an expression of their own heritage and identity. I mean, that's one of the most powerful things that football supporters can do, is actually founding a football club from scratch, having to work their way back up based on that meritocracy, but also saying, actually, this football club is just the shell for what our football club has always been. And I think there's a real beauty in that. But ultimately, Lleida fall into that category. They've ticked all those three boxes, and just must be such a great feeling for you guys knowing that you're moving forward with the best possible chance that you have of succeeding.
Look, Rory, I love everything you said right now, because we actually want to build something much bigger than a football team, right? Of course, we want promotions. But of course, we want to retire to a professional football one day. But if that's the only thing we achieve, I don't think we will have succeeded. You know what I mean? Because we want Lleida to become one of the strongest cultural and social institutions in our city. I think that the city of Lleida is better with a strong Lleida. Also, we want to reconnect with the whole territory, with all of these towns that I mentioned at the very beginning of this interview. We want the schools, associations, volunteer families, or even local business. We have more than 20 sponsors already. So we want all of them to feel that this is their club. So yeah, I think that football is a good starting point to achieve all of this and help the community in the city. And makes everyone proud, because I think that there is something that we need to understand, that Lleida has always had a very strong identity. So we are a city that sometimes feels forgotten because Barcelona. So that also made us, the people in Lleida, very proud of what belongs to us. That's normally happen when you feel a bit forgotten. That makes your feeling of belonging stronger, right? So I think that the football club has always been one of those things. And that's why the club, I think it's such an important institution for the city. And it was very sad seeing the club in this situation the last years. And we have the example right now that there is this new chapter and everyone in the city is helping to make it bigger.
If our listeners might remember, we spoke with Thomas Rothaus a couple of months ago now. The episode was called Football and Revolution Argentina in 2001, and during that we were discussing the roots of football in Argentina. And like you said there, like it came to my mind because you said that you want Lleida to be something bigger than a football club. And in Argentina, that's exactly what they are, because it's not just, for example, San Lorenzo FC or Newell's Old Boys FC. These football clubs are also community spaces and community hubs. They provide social spaces for members of their barrios. They provide food if people can't afford it. They provide educational programs for children, recreational spaces. And, that is something that is more than a football club because it's providing for the people within their communities. And in my opinion, that is what a football club is meant to do. Motherwell in Scotland are such a good example to look to for this. They've never been one of Scotland's big clubs. They've flirted with liquidation. They've been relegated a couple of times. But the way that they have positioned themselves as a club which represents the wider area of Motherwell, but also North Lanarkshire, is nothing short of incredible. And now that is paying dividends on the pitch. They had an incredible year last season. They're currently going through a decent European run in the qualifiers. They sold out their stadium for the first time last year in about 10, 20 years or something. Like, doing this and investing in your community, and importantly, realising that you not only represent your community, but your community represent you, and investing in that in a way that isn't tokenistic, but is benevolent and beneficial for all parties, is the best possible thing that a football club can do. At the end of the day, success on the pitch might come as a byproduct, it might not, but what you've done is created something that a lot of the clubs who win all the time can never replicate because they're so heavily commercialised.
100%.
But I mean, that's one of the things that you also covered in your book as well, Leku, and I just want to touch on this as our kind of last part of this episode. Your book, Banderas Blaves, is something that was really a tribute to the support and fan culture of Lleida, and I think that's really fascinating because, as you mentioned earlier on as well, one of the things that you went into quite heavily in this book was political and societal change within Spain, but holding up a mirror to that and seeing how it affected your football club.
And actually, the title means blue flags, by the way. I wrote this book actually in this season because it was, we were coming from seeing the liquidation close again. Finally, it comes to a reality. But I wrote it because of that. All the, the incomes that I will have with the book, I will donate it to the club. It's not for me, right? So you said in terms of politics and all that, like, for me, the Banderas Blaves is not a football book. I will say that it's a book about my life or the people around me, of the people of, and also life or a life of a generation of people from Lleida, but told through football, right? So through the book, I revisit different moments in my own life. So as you were saying, that connects them with important social, political, or cultural changes that happen in Spain and in Catalonia during those same years. So it's like, I think that football is simply the thread that connects everything, which is, in my life, happens the same actually in my real life. So yeah, the club became the way that I remember different stages of my life. I don't know, guys, if that happens to you, but sometimes when someone asks me about an episode of my life, I always linking this year with, hang on, Lleida was getting relegated, or we have, I was there with this friend, or you know what I mean? So I think that I was not trying to write the history of the football club. I was trying to explain what it feels like to grow up with a football club that becomes part of who you are.
Yes. That's fascinating in its own right. There's not many books that have been written like that. I mean, there is a really great collection of works that are now coming out about the culture of football more widely and all of these different intangible things. But, something that explains what football means to you as a kind of really emotional and raw thing isn't something that we see an awful lot of. And in this case, Jordan, you'll know better than me because you've lived in Spain, but Lleida, as is the case with a number of these other small community-based clubs that we've spoken about, the club and the city are really inseparable as entities. And again, that speaks to a wider element and a wider tie-in with how our football clubs relate to place. at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing it right now. We talked a little bit about them earlier, but we're seeing it with Rayo. The Bucaneros have said it doesn't matter if you play in Leganés or you play 200 kilometers away in Burgos. We're not going to be there because Rayo and Vallecas, they have to be together.
Yep.
And I think that's so true, and it is so important. I've seen people, they've messaged me or they've replied saying, oh, well, what does it matter if Rayo go to a nice new stadium and it's, say, 10, 12 kilometres, but it's still in Madrid? It matters because Vallecas and Rayo, they're inseparable. You cannot separate them. And it's the sort of same as, like you were saying, you can feel disconnected in lots of parts of Spain. It's so vast, it's so big. You can be dominated by certain cities. We know in Catalonia that Barcelona dominates everything. It's the same with Real Madrid. They dominate so much of Madrid. We really wrap up our identity in, whether we support Lleida or whether we support Rayo or Unionistas or whoever it would be, that is our identity. That's our home. That's sort of everything to us. And it's something that I feel as someone I'm still probably a Geary, I'm an outsider in Spain, and I go between Spain and Wales. I really see that strength of identity is so strong in Spain, and all across it, people will tell you, I'm from this region or I'm from this, and then they'll drill down into the province that they're from or the town that they're from. The other thing that I am hugely into is cycling, and you only have to look at the side of the road during the Tour de France or the Vuelta. You won't see many Spain flags. You'll see Galician flags. You'll see Cantabrian flags. You'll see Basque flags everywhere. You'll see the Andalusian flag everywhere. People really are so wrapped up in their region and their province and even their town. And sometimes even their street in Spain. People will tell you, I'm from this street, and that's who I am. And it is something you really feel strong. And it's something I've really felt when I've spoke to the people of Lleida. I've had so many who were updating me all through last year on how the club was going. I can see how strong the identity is and how much this club means to them and how much pain that they've been suffering over these last years.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to the issue of Rayo, an interesting caveat to that issue with their stadium and the detachment from place from the Bucaneros as well, Jordan, that Rayo pride themselves on being a neighbourhood club.
Yeah.
The neighbourhood club is a huge thing for the supporters of Rayo. It is huge. The attachment to the neighbourhood of Vallecas, and it is that word again, neighbourhood, is massive to the identity of that club and their supporters. How can you be that if you're not in the neighbourhood that you're supposed to represent and be a part of? But yeah, I mean, just generally in Spain, across the entire country, Spanish football more generally, it reminds me of that idea of the bell tower in Italy. It's the idea that you defend your bell tower, whether that's in a village, a town, a city, a part of a city, whatever that is. That's one really interesting caveat of European football that I really enjoy, because it has almost like a really cut and tribalistic element to it that we try to replicate sometimes. And again, only speaking for Scotland, it's a little bit different up here. Obviously, Scottish football is incredibly tribalistic, but not in the same romantic way as defend your bell tower. We're all just a wee bit more violent and aggressive towards each other, I suppose.
I will add about, because it's really interesting, the topic that you were talking about Rayo Vallecano, because Rayo Vallecano is a great example of how football club can represent much more than what happens on the pitch, right? Because people don't just support Rayo because of the results it's because they support it because it represents Vallecas, which is the neighborhood, and it's a traditional working class neighborhood with a very strong sense of community and identity. So if you take Rayo out of Vallecas, you kill everything that means that club for the people.
Yep, agreed. And it's a barrier that's it's very fluid because you have so many migrants coming there seeking to better themselves. I was there in April, and you'll see people I was sat next to someone in Vallecas from Honduras, and then there was people from Mexico in the row in front of me. It's somewhere where people use as a starting point to start themselves in Madrid. But despite that, the identity is so strong.
Yeah, it is.
Just on that note, Leku, what does Lleida mean to you, the city, and your fellow supporters?
What means for me, Lleida? I mean, it is, as I said during the whole interview, it's not just football. It is my family it is. Look, I started to understand how the city works going to the Camp de Sports. I used to go always to the behind one of the goals, Gol Norte, we call it in Spanish, with my dad, always in the 14th row because of the number of Johan Cruyff, right? So we were always in the same seats, and I was looking around the stadium, and I was looking at the stand who has the roof. So because there is only one stand with the roof, it's not like in UK that most of the most of the new stadiums they have a roof everywhere, right? In Camp de Sports there is just in one stand. So I was looking at that people thinking and understanding that they were the wealthy people of the city, the people with money, right? Because they can afford that ticket. I was looking down the goal with the young and people that were making noise and all that, and also around me family. So I start to understand how the people works and the different aspects of the city in there. And it was funny because I thought that the whole city on Sundays were there. I thought that the 9,000, 10,000 people that goes in the camp, it goes in the Camp de Sport, it was the whole city, because as a kid I was thinking, look, you cannot do anything else better than this on a Sunday, a cold December Sunday in Lleida. Lleida is so cold, right? And so foggy. So, and then when I started growing and I started meeting kids in the school and talking to them, and they weren't going to the stadium. For me, it was crazy. It was like another reality. So, yeah, Lleida for me means everything. But again, not just as a football club, but as a part of my life. I lived outside of Lleida since I'm 18 years old. I'm 36 right now. So I spend most of my life or half of my life outside of Lleida. So every time I go back, or every week I go on the weekends because I live in Barcelona right now, and I go to the Camp de Sport. For me, I don't know, like in the movies, this machine that you get inside and you go backwards in the time, you go like several years backwards.
Yeah, it's like every time you go to the stadium, you're remembering all the times you've been there.
Yeah, every single time. It's like seeing myself with my dad when I was a kid, seeing myself with my brother when he started growing, seeing myself with my friends when you make this mistake that you stop going with your dad and you start going with your friends. And so yeah, it's part of my life and part of my understanding of the city and the region, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get that. It's I think that's one of the beautiful things that football brings that not very much else can, is that sense of generational support, but also awareness that not just you since you were young, but entire lines of your family have been coming here for a very long time, and part of your DNA is as much the club as it is anyone else's.
Look, and speaking of that, one of the emotional things that we have seen right now with Lleida right now is parents becoming members again after many years, right? And signing up their children at the same time. So many people telling me that, look, they can grow up now alongside the club, because many of those children, they were never members before, or their parents, they were members, they stopped being members because during these years were everything like really uncertain. So now their parents, they want them to experience what they experienced when they were young, growing up with their own club. So I think that this is the most emotional thing that is happening right now in Lleida. A lot of people signing up their kids and thinking, look, maybe in 10 years we are in a professional football, and I can do this path. I can do this with my daughter and or with my son all the way up with the club. I think this is very nice.
Yeah, I was reading O San Lorenzo. It's a book released, I think it was earlier this year or later last year, by Will Dalton. It's one of my favourite books that's come out within the last few years. It's incredible. But one of the things that he mentioned in that book was something quite similar, like where a San Lorenzo fan, his wife was given birth, and they gave birth to their baby. This baby is literally minutes old, and his grandfather is already filling out his application for him to become a socio at San Lorenzo. And he's literally just been born. And Will in that book made the point that the first thing that this kid is probably ever going to see is a San Lorenzo socio card. But you've also got like cases like that in Scotland. There's a football club called Nairn County, right? Highland League clubs are very big within their local communities, but in the grand scheme of things, they struggle to get by sometimes, even though they get big crowds. They're not exactly made of money. But what Nairn County do is they give a free home kit to every 8-year-old, basically, so primary 3 pupil within the Nairnshire County area when they turn 8 years old. So whenever that kid has their 8th birthday, the first thing that they get is a new football top from their local club. And it's one great way to build support and remind people that you are their club, you know, especially in Scotland where loads of people have big clubs and small clubs and things like that.
100%. Look, and now in Lleida, I think that we are rebuilding this tradition that it's being passed from one generation to the next. Yeah.
Well, I mean, on that note, one thing that I was going to ask was about the future of the club. These kids are literally going to be your future supporters. You've just reclaimed the name of the club, obviously. You took charge quite literally weeks ago. What are your future plans at the moment? I can imagine, Leku, that everything has been incredibly chaotic for you guys over the last while, but it sounds like, above all, you're enthusiastic and really looking forward to what comes next.
Yeah, look, this is it's just being crazy. Everything we did this presentation day of the club, right? And we did it in a theater of a school called Maristes Montserrat because Lleida, Unió Esportiva Lleida in the 1939 was founded there in that school. So the theater, it has 500 seats, right? We posted on social media, look, in 1 week, we're going to do this presentation of the club. In 10 hours, we sold out. I mean, it was for free, but the theater was completely full. That was the first day that we thought, wow, something big it's about to happen. I always try to be careful because I don't want to exaggerate, but I spend quite a lot of time researching similar projects that start from the very bottom, right? And there are examples like AFC Wimbledon that you mentioned before, or even FC United of Manchester. They started with a lot of many supporters, right? But apart from those examples, I honestly have not found many clubs that have generated this level of support so quickly in the last year. So when said that, we know that the road ahead won't be easy, of course. My fear is that this thing becomes a trendy, like being part of the club becomes trendy, and in 2-3 years when we are hopefully 3 divisions above, but we cannot forget it will be still the 7th tier. So the people get tired, right? So I think that our ambition has to be make sure, first of all, that nobody ever has to rebuild Lleida again. That's the first ambition. And also that we were speaking about the children before. So if 50 years from now on, we have children that can grow up supporting the same club as their parents and grandpas, and I think we will achieve something much more important maybe than simply winning football matches. That I think that we have to aim that. The last few weeks, I'm always saying this, that I think that we understand in Lleida that being alive, existing, like having the club, it's more important than winning, right? And I think that football clubs don't only preserve trophies, like they preserve memories that like we were talking during the whole hour. So if we manage to save those memories for the next generation, then everything that we have done over the last few months, I think that will have been worth it.
I think that's beautiful. Guys, is there anything that you want to add just before we finish up for tonight? This has been a really good conversation.
Just from my side, because I don't want Lecky to sound like he's having to sell the club too much, but it's a really great story, and this is a really sort of special club. He's talked about the province there and how they really could tap into something really big here, because there isn't a lot of football clubs that can reach the levels that Lleida can reach in that province. So this could be something really special. And you can actually sign up to become a sympathiser. For €18, you can become an owner, just like Leku. You'll be able to vote him in or out. So if he's not, coming football heritage next year, we can vote him out. And for that €18, you can become a member. You can have your say, even if you're, living between Wales and Spain like me, or anywhere in the world. And you can also get access to 4 games. So if you find yourself in Catalonia, I know so many people go to Barcelona, jump on the train, get yourself down to Lleida and come and support this club, because I think, we've heard it here, and I think the fact that they're more focused on having a sustainable club and the club for the great grandchildren, I think that tells you everything about how special this project is. And I think it'd be a great journey to start on for people. So that's my little plea to come and join Lleida.
I think that's great advice.
I probably should sell myself as well, really, shouldn't I? Instead of selling everyone else. But yeah, you can find me on Substack. You can find me on social media. It's La Liga and Beyond. I write twice a week about Spanish football. I'll absolutely be writing about Lleida this year, like I did last year. And yeah, I'm hoping to write some good news stories about the club this year. Yeah, there'll be plenty of content throughout the year. So please come and join me and come talk about Spanish football with me.
Yeah, I would just echo that sentiment. Jordan does a fantastic job. Please go and check out his work because it's an incredible quality and an incredible standard that he puts out as well. We'll put links to Jordan's work in the show notes for this episode so you guys can go and check it out. It's a great look into Spanish football when so much about Spanish football focuses on a very select group of clubs. Leku, your turn. Why don't you give the club one last plug?
Look, first of all, I'm still amazed about your knowledge, guys. I mean, I had to put all of my effort in the conversation because your level of knowledge is amazing. And it's crazy, like really, really grateful for you to having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. And I also want to thank you, both of you guys, that for giving clubs like Lleida again the opportunity to tell their stories. And as we were saying, like football history, I think it's not only written by the biggest clubs, so it's also written by communities like ours. So I think it's really important that those stories are shared internationally. And yeah, I hope that, I don't know, after listening to this episode, more people around the world, as Jordan said, can pay 18 euros if they want to, or know a little bit more about Lleida, our city. Our supporters. And honestly, guys, thank you very much. I wish you all the best with your podcast, Rory, with your account, Jordan, on your articles, everything you do. And I hope, honestly, to see you in Lleida one day. You have a home in Lleida. You have a house in Lleida. So yeah, you're always welcome to at the Camp de Sports, boys.
No, thank you very much, Leku, for the kind words. The stories like Lleida's is the things that we like speaking about on this podcast. All of the stories. And, I'm not saying we don't cover larger stories and larger clubs, but this is the type of thing that we enjoy speaking about. I think what's important for me is that we speak with people who are as passionate about the heritage and history and culture of football as we are. And that's exactly why we want to have these conversations and bring them to other people. Everything that you guys have mentioned, Jordan, La Liga and Beyond, Leku, the membership for the club, we will put in the show notes for this episode so people can go and access them. I think 18 euros is a bargain to become a member and support another exciting addition to Spain's burgeoning fan-owned football club scene. So to all of our listeners, please do go and check that out. But once again, thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in for this episode. If there are any questions that you have, if you want to suggest an episode yourself, please DM us on social media or email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. Otherwise, we'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.